Friends, namaskara, good morning, adab. This morning we have three poets with us to discuss the impact and relevance of postmodern poetry in India. As you all know, our speakers are Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh, who writes in Hindi, Professor H.S. Shiv Prakash, Kannada poet, and Urdu poet Shri Khalil Mahmood. Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh has master's degrees in political science and Hindi. He has done a comparative study of Allama Prabhu and Kabir for his PhD from Bangalore University, which is now published as a book in Hindi. He is conferred with the D.Litt from Bangalore University in recognition of his literary contributions. An IPS officer of Karnataka cadre, Dr. Singh has held various posts over 3 decades of service. He retired as head of the police department of Karnataka state. Dr. Singh is now associated with many NGOs. He has 2 books of poems in Hindi and has translated many Kannada poets and writers in the Hindi, including those of Professor H.S. Shiv Prakash. Professor H.S. Shiv Prakash, most notable poet, playwright, critic, and translator. He has 9 books of poems, 15 plays, and 3 critical works. These works are widely discussed, performed, and translated into several Indian languages and into English, Spanish, French, Italian, German, Polish, and Turkish. He has also 4 books in English to his credit. Professor H. Shiv Prakash, a former editor of Indian Literature, the Journal of National Academy of Letters. He was a former dean, SAA, Jawaharlal Nehru University, former director of the Tagore Center, Berlin, Germany. He has traveled, lectured, and read poetry in various countries in Europe, Asia, and America. Shri Khalil Mamoon, an IPS officer, served in various capacities in the state of Karnataka and retired as Inspector General. A prominent Urdu poet in the subcontinent, he has 8 books of poetry to his credit. He is known for his poetic experiments in both classical ghazal and Azad Nazm. He has edited Kannada Adab, an anthology of Kannada poetry and fiction translated into Urdu. He served as the president of Karnataka Urdu Academy during his tenure. He also edited Askar, the literary organ of Karnataka Urdu Academy. He currently edits the literary journal Naya Adab. His poems have been translated into Hindi, Kannada, and English. Friends, this panel is a conclave of poets who write in different languages with a vast repository of experience and diverse traditions and poetic roots. The discussion will hopefully span the origin of postmodernism in the Indian context, comparative to modernism and post-colonialism. Now, over to Dr. Ajay Kumar Singh ji, who will be moderating this discussion on postmodern poetry in India. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And good morning to Dr. Shiv Prakash, Mr. Khalil Mamoon, and good morning to you all. And welcome to this session on postmodern poetry. Postmodernism has been described variously. It is simply said to be endlessly contemporary, one definition of postmodernism, or perennially modern is another way of describing postmodernism. At another place it said that postmodernism is a freewheeling creation constructed by a language that largely points to itself, whatever it means. Some people also call it maddeningly enigmatic, fascinating, exasperating. It's like a being in the hall of mirrors. But the fact is that though it may be enigmatic, fascinating, uh, it is also very influential. It may not be in one field of, let's say, one genre of literature, poetry, or essay writing, whatever, but as a worldview also, it has been extremely influencing, knowingly and unknowingly. I think many writers, many thinkers who may not accept that they are influenced by postmodernism are actually saying things which can be fall in the criteria of postmodernism. So, Dr. Shiv-Prakash, would you like to say something, or I would like you to say something about the origin of postmodernism and its advent to India?
Nobody knows the birth date of postmodernism, even in Europe. But when we talk about postmodernism, we distinguish between two things. One is postmodernism as a theoretical construct, number one. Second, postmodernism as a cultural condition. Roughly, the postmodern period is the sequel to the fall of classical liberalism and classical socialism and the rise of market economy. And it is surprising if one goes back to see that postmodernist and post-structuralist theories are bandied about only in the post-perestroika world.
Okay, around 70s.
The rise of multinational companies as the ultimate controlling power of society. Karl Marx has said that in the future communist society, the state will wither away. Because he says future communist society will come into power. But now, state has withered away because of the supreme authority, unquestionable authority of multinational companies. So this is the situation. And
so you mean to say that what is said to be postmodernism is a result of these basically politico-social developments?
I don't know whether this comes first or that comes first.
Okay.
Because, of course, in classical Marxists, they used to talk about base structure, superstructure, base structure decides superstructure.
Yes.
But I don't believe in that kind of primacy of materialist forces. It is something collateral happening at the same time.
Okay.
The simultaneous development. But one more thing is postmodernism is supposed to be a critique of modernism. Okay? And in Europe and all over the world, modernism was a very powerful aesthetic and literary movement. And after Renaissance, modernism is the greatest cultural movement in the history of the world. I mean, it's even bigger than the Renaissance, because Renaissance was focused in Europe, whereas modernism impacted not only Europe, Americas, all the colonies of European countries, all over the world, Asia and Africa, everywhere. So modernism was a much bigger thing, and there was modernist fiction, modernist poetry, modernist music, modernist painting, etc. We don't find a similar kind of consciously produced modernist postmodernist poetry or postmodernist literature, to the best of my knowledge, not even in Europe, and much less in India.
What about, you say, persons like Jack Kerouac or Allen Ginsberg? Were they not, could they not be called, in a sense, postmodern poets?
No, they departed from the modernist practices. Okay. For example, what's the important characteristic of Allen Ginsberg's poetry? Modernist poetry became, for the most part, a poem on the page, at least in Western Europe, though not in East European countries. But Allen Ginsberg brought back to poetry the orality of poetic communication, which was also done during the heyday of modernism in England by poets like Dylan Thomas.
Dylan Thomas.
So when there was modernism, it was not uniformly modernism. There were other dissenting voices within modernism, and in that sense, Allen Ginsberg's poetry was a critique of. It belonged to an epoch, the epoch of the new left in the U.S.
All right. Uh, Mr. Khalil Mahmood, whatever Dr. Shiprakash said just now, that type of thinking manifested in literature in general and poetry in particular. Would you like to say something about that?
Broadly agreeing with what Mr. Shiprakash has stated, I would like to differ with him in certain aspects. Postmodernism, as I understand it, was a movement in sociology and anthropology in France. When you talk about people like, I don't talk about Jacques Derrida, who came from phenomenology. His theory was more or less phenomenological. Certain places he has also become postmodern.
And deconstruction.
And Foucault, for instance, has been associated, but Foucault himself has stated that I am not a postmodern.
Yeah.
There are other thinkers, sociologically. One among them was an anthropologist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who has tried to implement it and all that. So it was basically a philosophical movement in sociological thinking.
How it manifested in literature and poetry?
I'll tell you, sir. As Shiprakash has stated, I don't find many examples, even in Europe and in the West. Coming to India, let us come to India. I would like to mention certain things which should be eye-openers to the listeners and the people who want to understand literature. Let us talk about modernism. When was modernism born in Europe? It was an aftermath of the First World War. Initially, during the First World War, the British poets started writing patriotic verses because Britain was involved in that. Subsequently, they got disillusioned because millions of people were killed and they had to face a very, very bad period. And in that period, T.S. Eliot wrote The Waste Land. Virginia Woolf, Ernest Hemingway, and people like that started writing about all these things. So, modernism in Europe and the West, this is the first phase of modernism. The second phase of modernism extends to the Second World War. It is about 1940 or like that. Eliot continued to write. And incidentally, in India, I would like to mention that many great poets, including Dr. Iqbal and Rabindranath Tagore, were not at all greatly influenced by these factors. Although such a big thing happened in the world, and both of them had international connections.
Why do you think it happened that way?
Because they were living in their own sphere. Iqbal was more or less immersed in propagating ideology and thoughts pertaining to Islam and the connected things to please the minority mind. Tagore, I do not want to comment. He was a multifaceted personality. The only man who was radical and who was also not internationally this thing was Qazi Nazrul Islam. He fought wars against, literally fought wars against the Britain. He was imprisoned on that. But it is not related to postmodernism at all.
No, but coming back to...
I'll tell you a little more time. In Hindi, for instance, during that period, there was a movement of you'll better aware of Chayavad. Chayavad has nothing to do with these things. Except for Nirala, whose poetry was here a revolutionary in nature. In Urdu, for instance, there was a continued movement of Maulana Hali. Maulana Hali wrote a critique of poetry, which was didactic in nature. And nothing happened, and Iqbal was writing. Nobody was concerned. To an extent, I should admit that little progressive things not affected by war was there in Premchand. Okay, understand? This is the scenario. In this scenario, even modernism was not there. In Urdu, modernism started in 1965 by Mr. Shamsur Rahman Farooqi through his magazine Shabhoon. He started talking about meaninglessness. He started talking about meaninglessness in both in poetry as well as in fiction. And these ideas were more implanted.
But was it meaninglessness in life itself? Or?
It was not there.
Or,
From a personal example, I will tell you. I had migrated to Delhi in 1965. It was the same time when modern movement was commenced in Urdu. When I visited Delhi, and I found Delhi to be, and people used to call Delhi like that. People used to call Delhi as a swollen village. There was no urbanization of the type which we find today. Crowds coming in, alienation, and in Urdu, people started talking about after 1965, existentialism, symbolism, imagism and all that, whereas they didn't know anything out of these things. And people like Farooqi started prompting people to write through his own agency. And now, incidentally, very unfortunate that he is being, after his death, he is being celebrated. It's very, very unfortunate for a country like us that things were imported. I'll tell you one example. Shiv Prakash has a friend who had come to India, Zingonia Zingoni. She writes in Italian and Spanish. When I was a chairman, I arranged for an interview with her. Besides other things, one of the questions which was posed to her was, what do you have to say about postmodernism and structuralism? She immediately said, what is that? This was her response. She was as per Shiv Prakash thinks, I will tell you, sir. He was an above average poet. She was a European. Costa Rica. And she was this thing from Italy, and she was also frequenting in France and things like that. What I mean to say is, these ideas had a very little impact, even internationally. Let us not talk about India.
Okay. If we think of Dr. Shiv Prakash, the word itself, modern, postmodern. As you know, the word modern is, I think, Italian root, moda, which means just now. Now, so anything modern is just now. Whatever is happening is modern. So then how do you say that where modernism stops and where postmodernism, how do you then, discuss such a thing?
Because these terms like modernism, postmodernism, etc.,
or are just some literary words?
They came into vogue during specific historical moments. We can't say in a historic fashion anything new is modern. That was precisely what modernism was not. Modernism has certain defining features. It's the literature, the art of crisis. There was the dislocation of form, dislocation of content, and dislocation of the communication between the artist and society. So it's the literature of alienation, expressing mostly an urban consciousness as opposed to the rural consciousness of pre-modern romantic mode of poetry, urban city-centered, and a certain ennui. The word is ennui. The philosophical formulation is ennui. Boredom was the existentialism and the theater of the absurd in Europe. This is one kind of modernism. This is what I call formalist modernism, which prevailed in both sides of the Atlantic, in the US and in English-speaking world. Europe is a different thing, coming to Europe now. But in the countries, for example, East European countries, modernism is a different context. For example, Mayakovsky was a modernist, not just because he was a formalist modern, but this kind of modernism was inspired by anti-capitalism, by socialism, by communism, and so on. So, modernism is the art of crisis, which may have been influenced by either by anarchism, or socialism, or communism, or even fascism. Ezra Pound was a fascist. And Rilke, the German poet who was a forerunner of modernism, was a fascist. And T.S. Eliot was a fascist. So
No,
what
would
is
you-
common to modernism is a certain crisis, a certain dislocation of the form and content, and the aesthetics or anti-aesthetics.
I'll
That's
come,
principle.
I'll come to that. I'll come to that. But since Mr. Mamoon, you mentioned structuralism and you mentioned Derrida, though you didn't talk about deconstruction. So I would like to say, whatever we have understood about modernism, postmodernism, what will be the relationship, or what is the relationship, if any, between postmodernism, structuralism, post-structuralism, and deconstruction of Derrida?
Postmodernism, Derrida is not all that relevant as far as postmodern theories are concerned. Although, to a certain extent, he says, okay, yes. His concern was more with improvement in the phenomenology of Edmund Husserl. Edmund Husserl was a German philosopher. I did some work.
Was he not a supporter of Hitler?
Well, that's a different thing altogether. I think
Because
that
he
is not
mentioned
relevant.
about some
That is not
Eliot
relevant.
and Ezra
That is
Pound.
not relevant because Hegelian thought influenced various German and European philosophers. So Husserl was one among them, as was Martin Heidegger.
Heidegger.
So that's a different thing altogether. But I should say that Husserl's philosophy was more idealistic. More idealistic in the sense, I'll try to explain. He mentions about a grammar which exists a priori. It exists a priori. And it appears to be
That's structuralism, isn't it?
no, not structuralism. Not structuralism. See, a priori existence. For instance, you see the structure of all the languages.
Yeah.
For instance, in Hindi we say, in English we say this is a man. In Hindi we say ye aadmi hai. The structure is subject predicate, subject predicate. What he says is this structure already exists in nature. This is what he mentions.
I think Chomsky also said something like this or something different.
Acha, now, another thing which is very important as far as Husserl is concerned, he says meaning is independent of reality. Meaning is independent of, one example which he gives
Which
is,
means what?
that means I'll tell you. I'll say, I saw the son sleeping on the bed. This sentence factually is incorrect. It's not real. I can't see a son sleeping on the bed. But it is meaningful. It is meaningful.
In poetry.
If, for instance, I'll tell you, a little beyond, although not much is spoken about that philosopher, which is very, very relevant, I'm talking about Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
Wittgenstein has stated
Ludwig.
that the cat is sleeping on the mat. He says this is not a reality. This is a fact. So distinguishing between fact and reality. What Derrida says is the meaning is contextual. Some people have interpreted that meaning does not exist.
No,
It
it's
is
not
not
so,
correct.
it's not
It is not correct. Derrida didn't mean like that. There has been rejoinders about that. Meaning is, what they say, language is semantically contained. It's a semantically contained entity. Over the years, things have come like that. And so, but postmodernism, what they say is, they speak about meta-language. I have not come across anything which is meta-language. I don't know what meta-language means. Meta-language is used in symbolic logic. In poetry, how can there be a meta-language? I don't understand. Then they speak about lack of harmony. Lack of harmony in the sense I can only understand lack of harmony when I was reading Rimbaud, author Rimbaud. His poems do not end the way normally the poems end. It appears as if it is incomplete. It is something like Auguste Rodin's sculptures.
Rodin's.
Rodin's sculpture was incomplete. Somebody's arm is broken, somebody is this thing, this.
But it's not always one of his most famous sculpture is this, the Thinker. I think it's very, very complete.
Very complete, but intentionally he did like that subsequently, I think.
Okay.
So what I mean is, postmodernist ideology, to me, because language, poetry is written in language. And language, to a great extent, has to be communicable. But what type of communication it is? Why, what type of images, symbols, words are used? What is the creative aspect of poetry? One cannot forget about that. So that way, the postmodern theory of the sociologist cannot be applied on poetry. So modern and postmodern, I feel a very thin difference. Very thin difference. They say context should not be there and things like that. The other day when I was listening to a webinar, a Pakistani poet has written about, he is mentioning about a street wherein the street, the wires are going here and there, and ultimately he sees a crow, a dead crow hanging from the wire. This is where the poem ends. He doesn't mention what it is and all that. Could be that is a modern this thing. It is meaningful, not that it is not meaningless. For instance, contemporary of Allen Ginsberg, who died recently, a very good English poet, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. You would have heard about him. He had written a beautiful poem on the underwear, long back. And his definition of poetry is collection of thoughts under the shadow of the lamppost. So, it is probably a parallel to what Wordsworth has stated, collection of thought
But
and tranquility.
quite the opposite.
See, this is, I feel there have been deliberate attempts. In India, nothing of that sort has happened.
No, Dr. Shiprakash, you were talking something about aesthetics. Now, so far we are not very clear as to in what form the Indian poetry manifested under the influence of postmodern, if at all it did. But they do mention some names. Some poets were already writing, like Nissim Ezekiel, Shiv K. Kumar. They were already writing, and I think some of their poems are cited examples of postmodern poetry.
Okay.
But would you like to say that, first of all, I would like to say something about the aesthetic itself, aesthetics of poetry, and then please connect it to the postmodern. But all said and done, this much I'm sure that though we may not be in a position to say that this is the starting point of postmodernism, we may not be in a position to cite some examples of the poetry of postmodern poetry, poems, but that this worldview, this thinking influenced all fields of life, in the architecture, in the field of art, in the field of sculpture. It certainly influenced a lot of people. So, but let us come back to the aesthetics of poetry.
Okay. I think to be able to characterize postmodernism in Indian poetry, if at all it exists, I don't think it does, but I'll qualify this later. We should understand the nature of Indian modernism. Indian modernism, because modernist aesthetics in Indian poetry was consciously formulated by very powerful poets themselves. Like in Hindi, when Mukti Bodh wrote the devastating piece on Jaishankar Prasad, it's the modernist response to a pre-modern.
But that's prose. That's prose.
Yes. No. This poet was
poet.
We can't dissociate Mukti Bodh's poetry from his prose. He was a great prose writer.
What is Andhere mein can also be
his
cited.
Brahmarakshas is a short story. Similarly, in Kannada, for example, Gopal Krishna Adiga theorized about modernism. He called it Mandi Navasanism. Like they have done in English. So in India, different, and for example, in Telugu, the great poet Sri Sri, in some of his poems, Nave Kavitalu, he says what modern poetry is. This is metapoetic poetics in Indian poetry. In poems themselves, they try to explain what poetry is. There is a whole tradition of meta-poetry in world poetry. There is a modernist meta-poetry also. So it was consciously done. And some time ago, quite some time ago, I wrote a piece on Indian modernism, basing myself on the works of the great Telugu poet Sri Sri. I said there are two kinds of Indian modernisms. One is formalist modernism, The other is political modernism. For example, in Urdu, one of the most important expressions of modern Urdu poetry is progressive writers' movement. It produced some very great poets, and they were critiqued. Other kinds of poetry also came in. So there was one formalist modernism. For example, in Hindi, Agyas poetry is not Agyas poetry. It's formalist modernism. It's revolutionizing the language of poetry. Whereas Mukti Bose's kind of modernism, he's modernist, not repeating romantic poetry. It's a different. It's also imbued with political ideology. So the political modernism is more an experiment in communication, whereas formalist modernism emphasizes form. These two kinds of modernisms exist, and these were the result of a certain kind of angst. In the West, there was angst on way in the post-war years. In India, a similar kind of angst was experienced by poets, whether historically justified or not, that's a different question, in the post-independence period. So that was the point of the origin of, though some of these movements predated the 1947 development. So these two kinds of modernisms exist. The political modernism of the leftist poets, progressive writers, was based on a certain kind of a priori faith in the progressive ideology. Things are going to be better and better, so on and so forth. And the formalist modernism had no such faith. It was the expression of a certain kind of agnosticism. So there was always this problematizing of the self, self-consciousness in the formalist modernism. Sometimes the two combined, like in Sri Sri's later poetry in Telugu, and some of the poems by Gopal Krishna Adiga in Kannada. So these two have to be recognized. But after the emergency, what would be postmodernist in India? I don't want to use the word postmodern because it has Western connotations. It has different meanings and connotations in the West. Okay. After modernisms, I would say. What are the after modernisms in India? They are a response to a situation when the faith in progress, the ideology of progress inspired both liberalism and socialism in the 19th century. That we have lost it. And the kind of belief in the freedom, relative freedom of the artist, that is also compromised in the post-perestroika, post-emergency period. So this is a response to a situation of political uncertainty and aesthetic precariousness. So what does one do? And there's also a period of a new development, which I think even in political thought has not been properly theorized, which cannot be grasped either by orthodox liberalism or orthodox Marxism, which is the complete takeover of the force, all the forces of the world by multinational companies, where the state has become much less powerful and progressive movements are withering away. So what is the role of poetry in this period? And I see a lot of good poetry, even by people who began like modernists.
No.
For example, Gopal Krishna Adiga began as a modernist. But his later poetry, the poem like Chintamani, Kandamka, etc., it explores a different terrain. Because we're looking at a certain historical phenomenon, certain, what's the word for that? Certain, the right word in gestalt. Certain gestalt of experience which did not exist before this specific historical epoch, resulting from the end of progressive ideologies, the end of utopias, and the beginning of new uncertainties.
I think we'll come back to this point, very important point, which you mentioned about Gopal Krishna Adiga writing later on a poem like Chintamani Alli Kandamukha. But, I mean, what you said just now, that this poetry written in India was very much affected by the politics of the day. So much more perhaps connected to politics than the previous generation perhaps. Though during during, let's say, freedom movement, a lot of poets were writing poetry which is, say, supporting the freedom movement thing. But as a thinking, I mean, as a theme of political thought in poetry. But would you say that, what about the new scientific discoveries which were made in early 20s and mid-20s? Did they anyway affect the poetry of the day in India or elsewhere?
Wherever,
I would like that you also to react to
wherever
that. First, let's
there is a symbiotic relationship between the base structure and superstructure. The time when patriotic nationalisms was challenged by the development, emergence of international capital, that was reflected in the theories of modern science. Newtonian physics gave way to Einsteinian physics. Law of uncertainty came into physics, etc., etc. Similarly, structuralism came into philosophy. Most of the modern philosophies...
Structuralism, was it slightly earlier?
Broadly, structuralism is the philosophy which does not endorse universal reality. It, as Khalil Saab was already pointed to, context-related truths. Everything is true in a certain domain. This is true of structuralist anthropology, structuralist linguistics, whichever field. But in structuralism, there were some constants. In Saussurean structuralism, for example, the meaning happens in language. I'm not going to abstract it. I'm summing up in a very gross language. The meaning of words depends on the uncertainty of their the uncertainty in the phonological system. But this uncertainty is based on constants in the language.
Okay.
Now, there are some constants. For example, Einstein in physics, everything was relative, but the speed of light was a constant. But in postmodern philosophy, we have reached a position where even this constant has become questioned. So, what is the essence of postmodernism? There is no definite meaning to anything. As they don't say there is no meaning at all. They say meaning is eternally deferred. Whatever meanings we can, or interpretations we can put upon any text, and postmodernism, when I'm talking post-structuralism, which is mostly text-based, text, the meaning of text depends on the context. There is no finality, or there is no, as Derrida puts, what's the word uses, the transcendental signified in language or in text.
Mr. Mamoon, will what he said something about that nothing is certain, and will this philosophy of post-modernism, does it border on nihilism? Would you say something?
I should say, I will talk about only Urdu. I will not, because I have not read much about.
But does it border?
I'll tell you. Basically, since, as I already told you, the modernist movement in Urdu, postmodernism comes later. It doesn't come at all, according to me. The modernist thought was based on hearsay in Urdu. Whatever somebody said, symbolism, they never knew what symbolism, what imagism means, what surrealism means, what existentialism means. And unfortunately, a majority of the poets who started writing purportedly as modern poets were unaware of the scientific developments of the basic scientific developments, for instance, Einstein's relativity or quantum mechanics, or the philosophical essence of nihilism connected to Nagarjuna's Shunyavad, things like that. They were not at all aware of that. So, generally speaking, and one more thing which came in the way was the tradition of Ghazal. The tradition of Ghazal, which has been kept alive for centuries, and I personally feel it's a retrograde step.
But it saved the Urdu poetry.
No, it's not like that. See, For instance, Japanese, haiku, they do write haiku, but they are not totally dependent upon haiku. Sonnet, for instance, then taraile, for instance. These are all old forms which are continued to be right, but they are not sticking to those things as a child's is associated with the mother, just born child associated with the mother. The Urdu psyche is to attach itself, attach oneself to a ghazal. Hence, a majority of the people have been writing ghazals. Important ghazal, this thing about whom sweeping remarks was passed that they are equal to Ghalib and things like that. For Zafar Iqbal or Ahmad Mushtaq and things like that. They are not even 1/100th of what Ghalib wrote. No, Ghalib, I will tell you, Ghalib, although he was going to the British for seeking pension and all that, was very, very independent. He was a rebel.
No, that is
and he suffered the Sepoy mutiny, and he wrote about that very, very indirectly, which our poets didn't do it because they were not aware of that. They didn't suffer that.
No, but Nazir Akbarabadi and some
Nazir Akbarabadi was totally a populist poet. He used to write something about Kawwa, you say, he writes something about Kawwa. Holi, you say, you write something about Holi and give it to them.
That I think he was say taking into account the new reality of poetry.
No, I don't. He was not that sort of.
That way?
His ghazals are good, but his normal poet, he wrote about Jai Shri Krishna. He wrote
Akbar Allahabadi.
Even not Akbar, and they were not relevant at all. The relevant poet of the modern, before the modern, was Firaq Gorakhpuri. He wrote, although he was a romantic.
I think he was modern.
He was a modern.
He
wrote certain very good verses. And after that,
but that was also
after that, Rashid, Noon Mim Rashid. For instance, Noon Mim Rashid, one of the poems he says, Khuda ka janaza liye ja rahe hain farishte. This expression,
is very
the angels are carrying the coffin of God. It's very, very bold and very questioning the concept of God.
So postmodernist.
He was not a postmodernist.
But this line,
I don't even call him a modernist because he was inspired by Iranian poets and he wrote Iran Mein Ajnabi, then subsequently La Musawi Insan. He definitely wrote good poet, but he became a victim of his lyrics.
But he was also only ghazals, you were right.
No. He was a totally free verse. Free verse means he used to write in verse, of course, but it was not ghazal. Okay. And the only poet who was very independent in his thought, but unfortunately nobody even today doesn't. He was the father of modernism, was Miraji. He is something astounding. See, he himself he was totally Indian. He told he mentions very clearly that I am inspired by the Vaishnava thought. Because he was in love with a girl, her name was Meera Sen, and only platonic love. So she used to go to the college and he used to follow her and come back. And after fascinated by that, he kept his name as Miraji. His actual name was Sanaullah Dar. He was basically a Kashmiri. But he wrote something fantastic. Poetry, fantastic prose, and not biased. Not influenced by any foreign power.
No, but Urdu poetry, let's come back to this point which we wanted to discuss. Let's say Urdu poetry, was it influenced by whether ghazal or free verse, whatever, by the new discoveries in the field of science?
Absolutely not.
No.
Except for a few poets. I do not want to talk about myself. But my poems, if you read my poems, it has a lot of questions. Questions about religion, questions about the traditional thoughts. I basically, as I agree with the postmodernists, wherein they say that these things are nothing but concepts. For instance, only Ghalib says that. Aadmi ko bhi mayassar nahi insan hona. Even for a man, it's not possible to become a human being. So, according to him, human being is a concept. Just as Iqbal's poetry, Momin, or if in Hindu philosophy, Brahman, Who is a Brahmin? Brahmin is a concept. Brahmin is not a caste.
No,
It's a concept.
No, that may be very
Momin,
philosophically.
see, this is, I'm talking about what Darida means. Conceptual formulation of the language. For instance, I will tell you one example.
I don't think it's, I think.
No, please, these titles. In Urdu, for a long time, for 20, 25 years back, we used to call Khuda. Because our background was Persian. We are Khuda. Khuda ne kaha, Khuda ne kaha. Now, all of a sudden, because of the Arabic influence, Khuda becomes Allah. Khuda becomes Allah. And it is so, Azam Shahid is sitting here, I wrote a poem. I wrote Allah. I wrote it in, what you call it, masculine form. He said, no, God is not masculine or feminine. I know, but that's how we speak about. So the language makes it Allah Mia. How does Allah become Mia? Allah become, how does we, see, language has concepts I'm talking about.
No, that's right. Dr. Shiv Prakash, poetry's connection or influence, or I mean, it is very much connected to political developments, etc. What about its connection with market forces and how it has affected the modern or the postmodern poetry in India and elsewhere?
See, first of all, to have some clarity about how political or philosophical developments affect a poet's creativity. A poet's creativity. A poet need not be an authority on contemporary history, need not be an expert in the history of contemporary ideas. It's in the air. And because the poet is sensitive, he responds to these things in a way a poet does. For example, the great Kannada poet Gopal Krishna Diga, my guru, he was not very well read. He read a little bit of Machiavelli, a little bit of Freud, etc. But
So
he was
Silton
not
Lewis, he
very
said he
well
was
read in
very-
Western philosophies. But as a poet, he responded much more sensitively to these phenomena than people who had read a lot about this.
How does that happen?
Because that's what T.S. Eliot said. Shakespeare could make out more about European history by reading Plutarch's Lives than a lesser poet would do after a complete study of the British Museum of European history. So poets have a special understanding. This we should not universe, not.
No, is it inborn or is it, how does that
I don't know how
capacity
it comes, whether it comes with the genes or one develops it. In Sanskrit, they talk about Sahaja Pratibha and Vyutvatti Pratibha. Sahaja Pratibha is something inborn. One also work towards somebody who has this inborn ability,
combination of
may
both.
ignore it and then he lose it.
A combination
Just as we
of both.
ignore taking care of our eyes, where inborn eyesight we have, we may also lose it. Similarly, even this you can lose.
Good.
So this is how poets responded. So knowingly or unknowingly, poets get influenced by what's going on around the world. Because sharp ears, sharp senses. Because poetry is this language sensitized to nth power. That is the language of poetry. It's not just an experiment in form. It's not just language game. That's why poets become prophetic in this sense. Not in the sense of Judeo-Christian prophets.
yeah.
They can see further beyond what many of the contemporaries can. In this sense, they get influenced. So whether during the modernist period or pre-modern period, during the freedom movement, or even now after modernism, poets get influenced by the society. And this
And
is
market forces are
this
there.
is and two important features I see in poetry of the after modernism period in India. It does not have the same degree of agnosticism as were there in certain kind of modernist poetry in India. Nor does it have that kind of a priori faith in the future utopia as a lot of progressive modernists had. For
poets had,
example,
yeah.
Mukti Bodh writes in one of his poems, he says in Russia, the Kundalini of the earth has become Jagrat in Moscow.
Yeah,
So it will take us to Sahasrara. So just as yogi is evolves to this Brahmagyan, the whole society
So-
would
so those-
ascend to the kind of communist Brahmagyan.
So what you mean to say,
So
though
that kind of hope utopian hope, and also the dystopian angst that characterizes the kind of modern. See, in modernist poetry, you have utopian aspirations, like in progressive modernists, like Bertolt Brecht and so many others, and certain kind of dystopian angst in the poetry of Ezra Pound or of T.S. Eliot or W.B. Yeats and so on. But in this a priori kind of feeling for either for utopia and dystopia is gone, and a lot of poetry of this period, particularly poetry of the 80s in India, the good poetry, there's no movement as such. In some language, there were conscious attempt to create movements. In Bengali, there was a certain movement called Uttaradhunik, but it petered out within a few years. I also, once upon a time, when I had utopian hopes about the world and literature, I wanted to create a kind of
peaceful, prosperous world.
No, poetry, at least not the world. What was it called? Some Uttaradhunik kind of thing in Indian languages. But it didn't take off at all. But what we see in during this period is that people have been trying to write a different kind of poetry, those who matter, without being part of any movement or school, as were the poets of the modern period.
Okay, one last question, both of you, I would like to react to. Will these new trends, having gone through this excessive questioning and discarding meaning, rejection of reality, and things like that, will all this finally bring us back to romanticism? What is your feeling?
Will the failure of metropolitan city structure, will it lead us back into primitive society? No.
Okay.
History cannot repeat itself. Sorry. There are certain repetitions in human experience, but not in history.
I'm saying this and let me clarify, I'm saying this in terms of, you earlier mentioned Adiga's later poem, Chintamani Kandamukha. In certain way, I think he does think in that poet.
No. Romantic poetry has
I was not saying romantic per se, but a nostalgic and remembrance.
This
in
precisely,
a rather,
the greatness of that poem is not nostalgic. He's talking about that one moment. As Octavia Paz puts it.
But is it not romantic?
It's not romantic.
Remembrance of that moment.
There's a very great book on the history of modern poetry by Octavia Paz called Chitindamaya. He says that the modernist poetry and in pre-modern poetry, the worldviews that inform them are of two kinds. One is cyclical view of time, which sacralizes the past, and the progressive linear view of time, Christianity, Islam, Marxism, etc., which romanticizes a certain future or the after death or the future of history, etc. But he says that poetry after modernism, the critique of modernism, like his own, and a lot of great poets in Latin America, such as Sijeva Hayo and so many others, it's a critique of both. It's trying to explore this moment. And Octavio Paz says, mythless, I enter the present. So modernists and pre-modernists had their own myths.
Okay.
The problem, we are working with myths, but we're not constrained, shackled up, blinded by myths. We are trying to, of course, even the great poets in the past did that. For example, somebody, Ghalib, he quoted, he knew all these myths, but he was trying to break them.
Yeah.
But now, this is not just the feature of the poetry of a great mind like Ghalib or Kabir, but this is what even lesser poets like me are doing now.
Mr. Mamoon, I would like you also to say something. What do you see the future of poetry or poetry of future?
I don't see any future. I should say that I don't see any future because the future of language, which is an expressing tool of poetry, is I feel it is very, very limited, and I feel the whole of language over things in the light of the visual mediums and the audio mediums and things like that is likely to gradually break. And again, the faithlessness in the sense, the dwindling of the traditional faith, whether religious or otherwise, whether it is, even atheistic thought and things like that, that's not going to last. What would be the future? I do not know. I really do not know, but I cannot predict. I definitely cannot predict as to what is going to be, what's likely to happen as far as poetry is concerned.
Okay. I mean, this quite postmodernist statement.
No, that's what I believe in.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
That's what I believe in. I have been struggling with language, even otherwise.
Yeah.
Right since the beginning, one of my poem is, the best poem is silence. That's only a naive way of expressing it.
No, that's
but the language breaks.
Yeah, that's
The language breaks.
No, I understand.
The language and the concepts, they do not tally. I cannot express what I see. I cannot express what I feel. In that situation, what happens?
No, that's a perennial question for a poet. The ideal expression, that's a perennial.
But I do express
search,
because I
perennial
cannot
search is there.
remain
Silent.
silent.
Okay. At this juncture, we will try to take some questions if there are some questions, and if they are, because. Uh-huh. I do not know whether they have come ready. Because that, see, most of the good poets, they don't remember their poems. I can tell you, they don't remember, I mean, by heart, as we say, their poems. But we can continue discussion. We can still talk.
Respond to what you said.
Yeah.
Also a question which was put to me earlier, the future of poetry. To think of the future is itself a modernist and pre-modernist proposition.
Okay, I'll come to that.
Because modernism, I believe that some people is going to utopia, some people dystopia. Now we don't know. We live in the present. We live in the present. And he said about his concerns about the future of language. Urdu is a threatened language in India. Not only Urdu, not to the same degree, even all our languages are threatened languages now. They're now being replaced, pushed into the background, they're pushed under the carpet.
By what?
By
whom?
The English language, which is one of the greatest engines of world hegemony now.
But who is doing that?
It's the whole system. Forces.
No, certain means who? Who are the part of? After all, see, we have our
The big brother.
Just a minute. We are so fond of talking about our sovereignty and all those things. So then who is forcing us?
Excuse me. When there are satellites monitoring as to what you're speaking on the mobile phone, even if it is not relevant, this permission was given long back for the satellites to monitor what all you are talking about.
But by whom this permission was given?
This was given by the establishment. To whom it was given, I did not go into that. Then subsequently, all institutions, religious, irreligious, arts, economic, everything has come in under the domain of the big forces. We are just a witness to the changes that is occurring. The whole society is suffering. Society is suffering. I don't call morally. I don't believe in what morality should be. I don't believe in economy. I do not know what economy means. Whether it is to be rich, and own a Porsche or a BMW or a Benz and live in a palatial building is relevant, or it is relevant to remain in two-bedroom apartment. Nothing is relevant.
No,
nothing is relevant. See, as far as our subcontinent is concerned, as far as the underdeveloped countries are concerned, these countries, including the governments, that are, whether it is local body or else, they are all under a scanner. They are all being led by some forces. I do not want to name them.
Okay. Now, Dr. Shiprakash, I mean, somehow to me, I mean, it's a nice statement to say that we live in moment, and we have been hearing it for decades. It's not a new expression, that living in the moment. Even in the 60s in Hindi literature, that was the byword of whole discussion, living in the word moment. And there were a poetry called Chanvadi poetry, means poetry of the moment. All those things were there. But I really, if we are honest, are we really living that way? Are we living, not looking into future at all? And is it possible for a human being to do that? There may be possible for individuals here and there, but as a society, is it possible for, that's one thing. Let me complete other thing also. I also would like to draw your attention to Arnold Toynbee and his theory of cyclic nature of history, and where, say, societies, the civilizations go up, then something happens, they are destroyed, something else comes up, and then something else. So are we not, when we say that no, there's no future, and maybe things will change, because that is the history so far. I mean, the two things put together. I would like you to react to that.
See, to insist on living in this moment is not a modern or contemporary phenomenon.
Not at all.
It's there in or medieval poetry, even ancient poetry. In Kannada, Basavanna says, Nimisha Nimishambho, Nimisha Ardhambo, Samsara Agumbo, Samsara Hogumbo, Kuda Sangama Marida Mayambo, Abrachayambo. Minute, just a minute, half a minute, half a minute. The world is coming to being, is going out, and this is the magic that Kudala Sangamadeva created. It's like the shadow of the cloud.
Okay.
But there's also, in our spiritual traditions, the greatest emphasis is to seek this Amruta Anubhava. Sant Gnaneshwar wrote this Amruta Anubhava. What does it mean? Amruta means deathless, immortal. Anubhava is Shanik. How to see the eternal in the moment. Allama Prabhu says it in one of his vachanas. Hindana anantavanu mundana antavanu indina vandaregaroga nindu noduva mahantana padavinige tora Yogeshwara. Show me the sacred feet of that great man, great person, who is able to embody the infinity of the past and infinity of the future in this moment. So this is the thrust of spirituality, this is the thrust of poetry also. And I now, as to whether society can practice, I no more hold the privileged position for speaking for the whole society, the whole world, or even the whole class or a certain community. Some of our poets hold a superior position. They talk about their own community. Some people talk about their class.
No, that's
not.
not.
But
No.
I am learning to practice this in my life and in my poetry. That's all I can
That's
say.
how it is.
This is not an agenda for the world. This only, not even, I'm trying to practice it. That's all.
Yes. Even Ghalib, I mean, what is that? कतरा में दजला दिखाई न दे और जुज़ में कुल खेल लड़कों का हुआ
खेल
दीदाए
बच्चों का
हुआ दीदाए
बीना ना हुआ.
तो ये बात तो पहले भी कही जा चुकी है, but and I think only at individual level, and I think poetry does help in this. In I'm sure what Dr. Shiprakash is saying, he has come to. If he were not a poet, I don't think he would have come to this conclusion. What do you say about that?
To me, you spoke about Arnold Toynbee. I don't think Arnold Toynbee in the present age, to a great extent, is relevant, because he has spoken about, he has stated that civilizations do not die, they commit suicide. This is what he has stated. Who is committing suicide here? People are making us to commit suicide. We are not committing suicide. As far as I feel, people are making others to commit suicide. This is the reality. Arnold Toynbee, in his own this thing, his work of the study of history is a great work, no, undoubtedly. But as far as Arnold Toynbee is this thing. As far as the poetry is concerned, to me, the poet who is most relevant and whose poetry I feel will definitely have a very lasting impact in the days to come is Maulana Room. Maulana Room's
Yeah,
one of the
he's-
couplets of Maulana Room I will narrate. He says, this is the Persian couplet. Hasile umram se shukhan besh nist. The result of life can be described in 3 words. Kham budam, pokhta shudam, sokhtam. I was raw, I became ripe, and now I am burning.
Now I am.
Burning. So, his various quotes, for instance, he says, the doors are open. Why don't you come out? Why you have imprisoned yourself? The doors are open. Why you have imprisoned yourself? In the sense, the doors of your house are open. It is you who are not coming out. So ultimately, it depends upon us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the individual is the
Individual
the
is very
person who has
important.
to-
But when enlightened individuals will come up to that stage, I don't talk about Nietzsche's Superman and things like that.
All right.
They are all very
All right.
old concepts. But when will man come of age? When will he reach that age? When will he reach that? Will there be a possibility of this thing? I feel, because after all, we are human beings. Many people like me may be thinking on this line. Many people may be thinking about living in a better world. Maybe somebody thinks.
No, Dr. Shiprakash, after all that we discussed, I still find that what you say and what Mr. Mamoon is saying, that poetry even today can be a tool for an individual to continue with his, I won't call it struggle, but with his worldview, and make it bearable to live and to go about his or her business in life. Poetry is an important and useful tool even today.
The moment we call something a tool, we're talking the language of mercenaries.
Language of
Mercenaries.
mercenaries. Okay.
Instrumentalism. No. For me,
No, but context.
No, poetry,
Context.
Poetry is not. Poetry is my context. My poetry, I don't want to place it in the context contemporary history or philosophy or anything. I view everything in the context of my poetry, which I'm
No,
trying to write.
I'm not talking about your poetry to yourself. I'm talking poetry as such. Can it be helpful? Is it helpful to people in any way? All right, let's put it this way.
Some people like it if they read it.
Mhm.
It may, to some extent, change their lives. I've heard that people who wanted to commit suicide after reading my poetry, some of them, not many, they changed their mind. Some people who wanted to do something else after reading my poetry, their mind changed, and some people got courage to face the problems of their life. It has happened to some people who care for poetry.
So it may have happened to some other people by reading somebody else's poetry.
It may have.
So
But
therefore,
it has happened to me.
Hmm.
There are moments when I was facing greatest crises of my life. I got this faith in life back by reading Rumi or Basavanna or Allama Prabhu or Kabir. And at least, for example, whenever things become too much, I remember Kabir's line, पानी केरा बुदा बुदा आसमान से का
आसमान
मन के
उसकी
जा
जात।
देखते ही चले जाएगा जो तारा
Jul
प्रभात.
Tara Prabhat.
So such lines always they bolster up, they help us, make friends, even with the worst situation.
I would like to add
Yeah, certainly I would like to.
last.
Yeah, I would like to use it.
I do not know about others. I do not know about any one of my retreats or anybody. But as far as I am concerned, I should admit that whenever I have felt miserable, probably I don't say I thought of I thought of committing suicide or running away. I have written something and I have found a release.
So that I think is a nice way to end the discussion on poetry. That you see, all said and done, poetry can be an extremely influential and a positive influence on the psyche of people. It has been throughout the history, whether people accept it or not, and it is even today's world. It can play a role, and it is playing a role. It may be different ways and different means, but it does.
In the Indian poetics, Sanskrit poetry, they talked about where does poetry happen? And poetry, in the kind of art, is Rasanishpati. Where does it happen? Does it happen in the mind of the poet, or in the context, or in the mind of the reader? I think this happens when the uh, poet creates a poem at a particular point of time. The reader, when he recreates it. When the two combine, only then the experience of poetry happens. So in that sense, poetic communication is a collaborative activity between the poet, who is one space, one time, and the reader, who may be in the same space at the same time, or maybe in another space another time. This is the important difference between theatre and poetry. In theatre, the actor who embodies the kavya and the audience, the sahrudayas, Natyashastra puts it, or prekshakas, they're in the same physical situation. Whereas in poetry, it may be a kind of across time, across spaces. So, but these two have to come together. Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
True. It's just that now that you have this whole time and space that you can go through, like what the poet might have been going through and what the audience goes through maybe 100 years, 200 years, 500 years down the line, they might be diametrically opposite, right? But they still have a unity.
Yes, in one sense, the perennial nature of poetry is one of the grounds for us to have some faith in the continuity of not just individual experience or the human experience.
Not all, but I'll ask, how do we develop a worldview that sort of defines what is right and what is wrong?
It's a very important question. It's a very important existentialist question. We think only we are facing this, but it was always there. In the Mahabharata, in Vyasa Bharata, there are many Mahabharatas, when this episode of Draupadi's molestation with Dushasana is happening, then Draupadi asks the wisest man in Kaurava court, Bhishma, who has the longest beard in the whole of the Mahabharata, is this according to Dharma? He scratches his beard, thinks he's the authority on Dharma, but he has no answer. He says Dharma is very niguda. Dharma is very profound and obscure. Okay, one part of the answer. Second part of the answer, he says, because you are the slave of your husbands are the slaves of Kauravas, you are the slaves of slaves, and the master of your master can do what he likes with it. The answer he gives. The word dharma, for example, in Indian thought was used since ancient times. Buddha talked about Dhamma. And the word Dhamma in Buddhism never meant religion. It meant the cosmic law.
Yeah.
Sabbe Dhamma Anicca. When Buddha said that, all phenomena is
Transitory.
Evanescent, anicca. He said Dhamma is the universal law. In Sanskrit also, dharmo rakshati rakshitaha, they say. This is the universalist sense, which is the equivalent of what used to be called Rita in the Vedas, cosmic law. But later the word dharma came to be in a relative sense. Raja dharma, praja dharma, sati dharma, pati dharma, brahmana dharma, shuddha dharma, this dharma, that dharma. In Duryodhana's ambivalent answer, you have this confusion. Today, we are also,
Bhishma's answer.
Bhishma's answer in the Duryodhana's court. Today also, we experience this with a greater sense of urgency because modernism relativizes ethics. Structuralism is another name for theoretical model which reflects the relativity of truths. Okay. But how about ethics? Is there something called universal ethics? Khalid Saab mentioned Lewis Strauss. Lewis Strauss tried to create a universal ethics through anthropology. He failed. He could not. But if you look at the testament of greatest, the wisest people in human history, like Buddha, Rumi, and so on, they may not have formulated. We can always see them gravitating towards a certain kind of universalism. And the word universalism has become very unpopular in academic circles these days. The moment I say something universal, they think that I am an agent of some fascist organization. Which is not true. Universalism cannot be defined, but it exists. Do we know what's the meaning of love? Can anybody define it? No. There's a famous poem by Auden, Law Like Love. The judge is trying to give a verdict at the court. He says, according to law, one mischievous boy asks a person in the court, asks him, what is law, your Majesty, your Honor? He says, law is like, you don't know what I mean, law is, you know what I mean. Law is like love. What is love? Love is like love. Nobody knows. But you know it intuitively, you can't formulate it. So what is good, what is bad, we know it intuitively. And we most often, if there is the reason for there not to be greater barbarism in the world than there is now, is because, at least till now, majority of people are in the Sena moments, feel that instinctively. Except during the period of mass hysterias.
I would like to add a few things relevant to your question. I would like to explain these things in the light of what has happened in Urdu. The whole concept of modernism, it started somewhere, as I told you, in 1965. At that time in Urdu, there was a magazine which was being published by Mr. Gopal Mittal. The name of the magazine was Tehreek. And it was openly pro-American magazine. Openly they used to publish what's going on in Russia and things like that, 1 or 2 articles. When Shabkhun started, there was a tirade against the ongoing progressive movement. And progressive movement, if you are aware, produced great writers. Poets, of course, were not very good in that. And its organizing secretary, you would have heard his name, was Ali Sardar Jafri. He was the organizing secretary for the progressive movement. At that time, Majrooh Sultanpuri was writing, Kaifi Azmi was writing, Sahil Ludhianvi was writing. In Pakistan, Faiz Ahmad Faiz was writing. But the tirade was only against Ali Sardar Jafri. Why? Because he was the organizing secretary of the progressive movement. The second thing, as you mentioned, good, bad, and moral and immoral and things like that, there was probably a design in delineating the writing class from the social commitment. It was very vivid. Farooqi, in most of his writings, disdained. There are people who have seen him talking like that, you know. One of my friends is a professor of journalism in Aligarh Muslim University. Mr. I can name him, Shafiq Khidwai, who writes in Hindu. He was mentioning that he was in Lucknow. Once he went to meet him, and certain poems he had received. I said, he used to call names to people and all that. देखो साला क्या लिखा है इसने पूरा माना लिखा है इसके अंदर माना आ गया है meaning has come in this poetry, useless poetry. So he was against meaning. And recently I happened to see a webinar when one Khalil Haris from Pakistan was conducting it. Khalil Haris clearly mentioned, I got a letter from Farooqi stating that you sent something to me, some poem, but don't touch society. Don't touch society. This is what he specifically told. And fiction was written during that period. One name in fiction was Qamar Hassan, another name was Ikram Bagh, and third name was Ahmad Hamesh, who subsequently went to Pakistan and started writing. All those writings took away the reader of the short story in Urdu. And you know, these things happened after a lot of things had happened in Indian fiction, Urdu fiction. Saadat Hasan Manto, Rajendra Singh Bedi, Krishan Chandar, Ismat Chughtai, Ghulam Abbas, they were stalwarts. The things which they created are even today, and of course, Quratullah and Haider. The greatest tragedy which happened in this subcontinent, which affected all the Indians, was the massacre in the partition. We are never underwent any tragedy like World War I and World War II and things like that. Even Sipahi Mutiny was not all that relevant. But the partition, and during partition, what all Manto expressed, whether Mozel, Toba Tek-Singh, Thanda Gosht, the socially committed things which they wrote. Rajendra Singh Bedi. It was not, of course, Rajendra Singh Bedi was not connected to the partition massacre and all that. But he did write socially relevant things. His famous, this thing which was also, a film was made, Ek Chadar Maili Si, and things like that. So the basic thing was to drive away the writer from the social this thing and to finish politically, because the progressives, all progressives were connected with Soviet Union. Majority of them got the Lenin Award. So they wanted to finish it, and they finished it. And no great writer was produced by the modern movement. We have a very great name, big name, Akhtar Ali Iman. He was very independent. He was a romantic. He was never influenced by progressive movement.
No, but Maun Saab, his question was slightly different.
No,
these things what you are saying are the facts, and only thing which can, it's a perennial question, as Dr. Shiv-Prakash said. One can only say that an individual has to keep his conscience clear and not allow himself or herself to be get carried away by others' deliberate attempts to misguide, and keep one's own understanding of morality and ethics and act accordingly. And when more and more people do it, that's how society will perhaps remain peaceful, and there'll be peaceful coexistence. That's what we can say. Thank you very much. I think we have overshot our time, and thank you very much for hosting us. Thank you.